Escape to the metaverse. Better act like you know. Yeah. You are now tuned into the Matthew and Rizzle show. Yeah. Escape to the metaverse. Better act like you know. Yeah. You are now tuned into the Matthew and Rizzle show. Yeah. Escape to the metaverse. Better act like you know. Yeah. You are now tuned into the Matthew and Rizzle show. Yeah. Escape to the metaverse. Better act like you know. You are now tuned into the Matthew and Rizzle show. Yeah.
Okay, Greg, welcome to the Matthew and Rizzle show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, really stoked to have you on, dig into all things SquiggleDAO. But first, if you want to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your backgrounds, sort of how you fell down the crypto and NFT rabbit holes, and then what led you to SquiggleDAO.
Sure. Yeah, I went down a rabbit hole in 2015. Originally, I remember going to the first meetup that I had heard about. I didn't know anything about Bitcoin or anything, but I go to this meetup at a very famous location in Vancouver. And the first thing I do is go over and say hello to the first interesting looking dude I see there. And he starts ranting about DAOs in 2015. I was like, what? I just was immediately hooked because I had no idea what the hell he was talking about. And just kept going down the rabbit hole, figured out that, oh, this is how civilization evolves, the next step. That's really what sort of clicked for me, is that, crypto economic theory, as well as, the ability to coordinate large groups of people across large distances based on alignment of values rather than, geographic proximity or cultural alignment or anything like that, just became the solution to all the problems that I was hoping that we would solve as a species. And I looked for lots of opportunities to get into the space, originally just like playing with ICOs and that sort of thing, and then tried working at some TradFi companies. My career has mostly been in early stage startups. Played with that a lot as well, but eventually found a home with SquiggleDAO because of an opportunity that Jess Sloss and I were exploring. We were discussing the possibilities of using, the possibilities of using NFTs as a incentive to create community. And we chose the Squiggle because it was available, it was still affordable, and it had a lot of cultural relevance already. It was the first project launched on Art Blocks, and this was just when Gen Art was taking off. And people really liked them, and they were accessible. People were already talking about them. It didn't have the same cachet as a CryptoPunk, but there was enough momentum there and enough interest there that we thought, okay, there's enough here to start. And that was basically the idea. How much culture can we create around the shared like of art, and how much value can we create? And that's the experiment that is SquiggleDAO.
Dude, I remember when I first heard about it, and I was like, man, this whole concept opens up so many cans of worms. It's probably not like the best analogy, but just like so many like different ways to play around with NFTs and just what you're saying, like organize people. Dude, before we go any farther, man, I just got to ask you, I'm like listening to your story. I'm like, you're at this meetup in like 2015. You just go up to this DAO dude in like 2015 who takes you down this rabbit hole, and you said he's the most interesting looking guy. What does 2015 interesting looking DAO dude look like that caused you to just go up to him?
Like weirdo neckbeard kind of,
All right, yeah. Cool. Just like I imagined. All right, great.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's exactly what you would have thought. Things were super weird back then. And, and just it was a lot of visionaries and a lot of people who, were looking for fundamental change in society that they felt needed to happen. And these were the people that really kicked it off, I think, back in the day. It's obviously very different now, but I think that's what drew in the big thinkers and what got us to where we are now. So it was a very interesting time.
Dude, I agree 100%. A lot of us were around in those like early weird days, and they honestly were pretty early and weird, obviously up until not too long ago. So dude, can you talk to us a little bit about like, SquiggleDAO? I hear you obviously mentioning like, alignment of goals, like working across boundaries and barriers. I'm a huge fan of like all that stuff and like sort of that core ethos of crypto. How like what would you say is like the core ethos of like SquiggleDAO, and like, how does it sort of use these advantages of crypto to bring people together? What's sort of the mantra you guys got going on?
So obviously it's a DAO, so the vision and the culture will grow from the original idea, but the original idea was to have an impact on crypto culture and art culture. So, we thought, okay, well, if we can bring a bunch of people together that like this art, we can do way more as a group than we can by ourselves. And the idea there was derived from the concept of like a large gallery or art house that, as a result of their large collection, have a lot of influence in what happens in the world. Museum of Modern Art's a good example, right? They can drive a lot of culture because of the collection that they have, the cachet that they have. And we were like, well, we could probably do that with the DAO. So what's the best way to explore that? And yeah, I think a big part of, what we were trying to do around that was collect as many squiggles as possible. That's one of the core aspects of our mission right now. It's a very simple concept, but it allows us to focus on building the value of the treasury and building the value of the community. So we're not approaching this like some of the other NFT art DAOs where they, would raise money or pool art and then build a community. We wanted to do it the other way around. So we didn't do any fundraising. I loaned 1 ETH to the treasury, which I haven't got back, just so that we could process transactions, and then ran a series of contribution rounds to basically recruit the community into this concept. And we ended up with 232 squiggles and a bunch of other gen art that's really awesome. So that worked out really well. And now the mission is still, get as many squiggles as possible. But the way that we're looking at that is somewhat different than I think the norm, because we're focusing on having a larger, more diverse community rather than a hyper-focused, more corporation style. When I think of DAOs, there's kind of a spectrum, right? On one side, there's the corporation, which is, this isn't a derogatory term by any means. It's just, the size and the coordination and the focus. So something like maybe Flamingo DAO, where they raise a lot of money, they have a limited membership, and they have a very specific mission of collecting art. Arguably the same goals as us in many ways, but organizing differently. And then there's us, where we have a relatively open membership. There's 600 active participants, and we have a treasury that those people use. But the game theory and the way that the organization operates is different. So we drew a line in the sand and said, okay, we're gonna focus on creating value within the community that allows us to buy as many squiggles as possible. And that is basically what our medium-term roadmap is. So part of that will obviously be DeFi related. There's no way to escape it. And why would we want to? It's, again, not a bad thing. But really, I think what we're trying to do with this DAO is to make it sustainable. And with a community of this configuration, it needs to be fun. It's almost more of a game than a business in many ways. I think about corporations like a traditional job. It's like, your employer has a carrot and a stick. They give you a carrot, it's your salary, your bonus, your stock options, whatever. And they have a stick, which is, well, you have an employment contract. And if you don't show up to work, I can fire you and blah, blah, blah. In a DAO, you only have carrots. You don't really have the stick, right? It's like you need to draw people in and get them excited and enable them to, express their creativity. And that's a lot more challenging. But as a result of, the way that these communities work, producing fun and making it engaging is the best way to do that. It's very similar to old futurist concepts where, games and work really are basically the same thing. They're just expressions of creativity and play. And so I think what we're trying to do within the DAO is really make that as enjoyable as possible for people to participate, and then enable them to add on to those layers, many of which will produce either social capital or financial capital for the DAO to then go and acquire more squiggles from either the open market or from other patrons or collectors that are looking to sell them.
Can you take us back to when the Squiggle DAO first spun up? I remember back then there's like a call to action, like join, maybe you have to have a squiggle to get in there. And like from there, like how were you able to get folks to kind of donate their squiggles to the cause? Like walk us through those early steps. And then I think it'll be really interesting to see like where it jumps off after the squiggles just dramatically appreciated along with everything else that is on art blocks.
Yeah, I was blown away by the response that we got from the community initially. Like it was really incredible. You've possibly heard about the fact that I'm getting a squiggle tattoo, and it's because of my lack of, confidence, I guess, in the short term. We'd never done this before. We didn't know how the community was going to react to the possibility of donating a piece of art to a DAO. And obviously there wasn't as much hype around it back then. So I think it would have been a bit easier, but the pitch was, hey, like we're greater than the sum of our parts. Let's work together and do something fun around this art series. And the best way to do that is to give you, in exchange for your donation, some votes on what to do with the treasury. And it was a win-win for us. It was basically, we get to make this treasury grow without taking in any money. And we also get to distribute the votes, because the way that we launched the DAO was slightly different than others. We didn't have a strong technical team at the time. So we basically minted the token. The Genesis team members got a piece of that so that we could operate as a DAO. And then we proceeded over the next couple of months to just give away as much Squig token as possible. So we went from, majority voters to minority voters over the course of those 2 months. So we definitely achieved our goal of being more decentralized, as well as raising this treasury. As things progressed, as the value of squiggles has gone up massively, there's definitely a lot more interest in the DAO. We still have people joining all the time. We still have people buying squiggles and being like really excited about it. But there's obviously been people who are wondering, like, whether they have some regret around, oh, I donated this squiggle and
Yeah.
it's gone up in value and all I have is a squig token left over. I don't think that's a big problem, because we haven't fully hit our stride in terms of, we have a lot of the things that are going on in the DAO are internal. We haven't really been talking about it outside of the DAO. So there's so much that's going to be coming out that, I think that's just a temporary experience where people were like, they probably wouldn't have held on to those squiggles anyway. But now they're a part of a DAO that's going to produce net value. Plus they get to decide what to do with one of the best NFT art collections on the planet. Like that's a thing that for a medium or long-term thinker is going to be a huge deal. This collection will be worth a lot. And that gives you a lot of social capital to go and do things. We'll be able to display this in real world galleries that are substantial that people know about. We'll be able to fund real world interactive art experiences that activate either the individual's art themselves because it's an NFT base, or just bringing them into the world, similar to what the CryptoPunks community has done, and now the Bored Ape Club community is doing. So a lot of those things are in the works, and I think we're really excited about the possibilities of this. It's just there's a growing period where we really need to build the team, collect the ideas, and start executing on them. And so that's kind of where we're at with it right now.
Dude, in terms of building this thing, can completely understand why you wouldn't, want to announce every single decision, every single step of the way. And, as you're building out the DAO and the, long-term vision, but can you share any sort of pie in the sky objectives? Like you had mentioned, getting these into some, in real life museums, people being able to use them, as sort of like cloud building, social capital, in order to get things done. Are there any other things that are on the long-term roadmap that you are really hoping to steer this thing towards, or maybe even if it's not something specific, maybe just some sort of goals, community oriented goals, or paradigm shift? It seems like you're big into the whole mantra of what this means and sort of leveling the playing field. So yeah, man, what is it like? Is it totally amorphous, 5 years from now, or are there some things on the list for it?
Yeah, there's going to be a lot in the next 6 months, I would say. We're raising a small amount of money right now so that we can go and do more in the real world. We have a lot of Squig token. Because of the way that we launched, the vast majority of the voting token is still held in the DAO, which is really awesome. But we don't have any ETH or USDC. So we're going through a process where we can raise some of that, which will allow us to do a little bit more interesting things. And in the short term, we're building out some tooling that allows us to activate more of the community effectively. Because again, we're a larger community. It's more challenging to coordinate a larger group to work on certain things, which will serve us really well down the line when we're more in a social capital development piece. But in terms of building stuff, it's a little bit more complicated. So we're building out some tooling to do that. Plus, we're launching our first season, which is a familiar cadence that a lot of DAOs are now using. It's basically it gives us the ability to point strategically in a particular direction for a period of time and have a budget around that. So we're calling it Season Green, and it's a 90-day window where there's 100,000 Squig budget allocated to the whole program. And it's basically an opportunity for us to push in a particular strategic direction and activate anyone that wants to work in that time frame. And we're doing it as a discrete time frame, because then you can do a couple things. One, you can course correct. So if things don't work out, you can kind of shift for the next one. Two, there's a finish line, so we can reward people for participating. And there's some really interesting things that we're looking in there. Actually building out a derivative art proof of participation sort of game layer to the DAO. I think that's probably one of the biggest things that we're exploring right now. So it wouldn't be a one-off proof of participation. It would more be this more complex game layer that would reward people for participating in larger initiatives and stuff like that, which we think is going to be super fun. And then we have some other things to align on the community development, as well as acquiring and funding artists. So as I was saying at the beginning, we want to get as many Squiggles as possible. And one of the ways that we're going to do that is by allowing people to sell Squiggles to the DAO in exchange for ETH or Squig token continuously. So we're partnering with some of the Zora team on launching SquiggleDAO, which is very similar to Punks.house. which will allow fractional ownership and auction style sale of Squiggles. So the combination of that plus some other tooling that we're building will allow people to either fully or partially liquidate Squiggles and allow the SquiggleDAO to purchase them. So if you're because many of our members have multiple Squiggles, and it makes sense to, divest occasionally from, the market. And when people do, we want to be able to give them an option to sell it to the DAO rather than sell it to the open market, because that, if I'm already a DAO member and I'm selling a Squiggle, it makes sense to sell it to the DAO, because then in effect, I'm still owning part of it, or I'm owning, the influence over it, and the community that I'm in appreciates in value. So that'll be one of the feedback loops that we'll probably launch in the next cycle. And then I think we're going to, focus on the badging and the gamification a little bit of the DAO, and then eventually within that time frame start stepping more into the real world. So we have a few ideas that I can't talk about yet because we don't want to spill the beans. But things where, you're going to see Squiggles in the real world, and they're going to be interactive in some form. So that'll probably be the next big piece for us.
I got to ask you, the decision, like, since you are sitting on a vault of Squiggles, depending on folks' estimates, like multiple millions, maybe tens of millions or more, why take on external funding as opposed to selling a few of these Squiggles, building up the treasury organically, and then having this be more of a self-funded venture as opposed to taking that external capital? Again, I'm not sure what sort of capital you guys took on to help fund this, but just curious about that strategic decision.
Yeah. I think first of all, we want to have the largest collection of Squiggles, so it wouldn't make sense to sell any of them. Just, in a very narrow view, that just seems antithetical. But in terms of raising money, the process will go through proposal just like anything else. So the DAO members will get a chance to vote on, who's participating in that round. And you've seen this with many different DAOs, and the way that they're running their fundraising. Forefront, for example, they're pitching the community with relationships that they've pre-established. And I think it actually benefits the DAO to bring in certain groups of people. Like, we've been talking with other DAOs that want to participate. I think that's a win. We've been talking about value-aligned investment groups and individual investors that, again, are very enthusiastic, very long on DAOs, want to contribute, don't want to divest from their NFT holdings, but would be willing to, help capitalize the DAO. And I think that actually works in everyone's favor, especially because in exchange for that capital, we're giving them a vote. So now they're a member of the DAO, in the same sense that everyone else is. And now we have a new stakeholder in the DAO. And I think that's a win. So we've definitely talked about it. I think we're Squiggle maxis, and we see the long-term value in this art series being, not fully realized by any means yet. And so it wouldn't make sense to sell something at this point. We have so much Squig token, and anyone that we sell it to becomes a stakeholder. That's a huge win for the DAO. So it just feels like the best approach.
Just out of curiosity,
I'll just finish with the tricky part is making sure that you have the right people in your corner. So we're not just going to solicit anyone. We want to partner with groups or individuals that really believe in the mission of the DAO, and they don't have to be, daily participants or anything, but they need to be just having our back. We're not just looking for speculators or people that just want to ride the wave.
Dude, just out of curiosity, in terms of the people who are joining the DAO now, and I would imagine you got a little bit of everything. It sounds like you got a lot of investors and other DAOs interested, but of the people joining now, are a lot of people like straight up buying Squiggles off of OpenSea and in order to join the DAO, or is it a lot of existing Squiggle holders that have, you've sort of won over enough to get involved in the DAO or become part of the DAO, or what's the demographic of people who are current day hopping on board?
It's hard to tell because obviously you have a limited amount of information on each participant, but it's mostly people buying their first Squiggle, which I think is really awesome. And you can tell because when they show up, the first thing they do is like, yo, check it out. This is my first Squiggle. And they're so jacked to show it. Some people will even PM me and be like, hey, this is my first Squiggle. I can't wait to be involved. So I think that's a really promising sign because it means that we're still growing as a community. I mean, if we think about the DAO not even existing, Squiggle holders are still a community. They're people that value this art in some form or another. We're just bringing them together and enabling them to coordinate on some interesting ideas. That's really what the DAO is doing. So to see people, especially at these prices, new people joining and being excited about it and looking for ways to contribute is a very good sign.
Yeah, it's really crazy, especially like the prices of these Squiggles, the floor prices even, just like, how do we get here? It's like 0.035 ETH or whatever for the original mint. And it's just like so bonkers. Even with like the fluctuations in the market and everything, it's still super, super valuable. But I'm curious, of course, like right now we're in this sort of like, okay, a bunch of ideas, trying to kind of clarify the next few steps to kind of progress. But already you're starting to see the sort of like inter-DAO collaboration, DAO to DAO, as opposed to like B2B, I guess, interactions, which is just super fascinating to see. But if we kind of look forward to the future, 3 to 5 years, like what does this all look like, this whole ecosystem, and where is SquiggleDAO within this like broader scheme of other DAOs operating, doing their thing, investing, collecting, all that good stuff?
I think DAOs are gonna, think about a social oriented, like all the big DAOs right now are DeFi related, and arguably they're not really DAOs in some ways. Like they're obviously using tooling and this is a debatable subject, so it's not worth, getting too crazy about it. But a social token or a social capital based DAO, right now, they're pretty small, right? They could be huge. They could involve tens or hundreds of thousands of people and will have a lot of influence over certain aspects of society as a result of that. I think that's where they'll go. It's going to take some time for sure, but every day there's more people, full-time crypto, joining DAOs, skipping school or skipping actually going to school in the first place to go and join a DAO. And as more talent and more people align around certain values and they're activated in a way where they can be more creative and less, most of the work that you do in large organizations these days is incremental or redundant. Somebody's already built the thing that you're building. And in this world, we don't really have to do that as much anymore. Everything you build is additive. And as a result of that, you get to use all the things that everyone else has built already. And so the rate of innovation is geometric. It's not linear. And so I think we're just going to see these organizations have massive responsibility and influence in certain aspects of our lives that really focus on things that people care about. It's almost like an organization that can lobby on macro policy and environmentalism or social initiatives or things like that. They could easily spin out as education institutes or art institutes or portfolios of real estate or organizations that like VitaDAO, for example, like research organizations science is an industry now, and it's heavily influenced by incumbent industrial players and billionaires, right? They're the ones that choose where the funding goes, which essentially directs the course of science. And I think that's one of the biggest issues with the modern world, is like the right things aren't being researched, either because they don't have the profit motives or incentives, or they're counterproductive to the business models of the incumbents. And a DAO is not constrained by those issues. A DAO can be organized around, life science or regenerative agriculture or, other things that people really care about that have proven value, but never get funded because nobody wants to fund them in the current world. But if there's enough people that do, then you can easily get there. And so I think you'll just start to see huge, complex organizations. Like, we're starting with art because it's the perfect beachhead. It's like, you like it or you don't. Like, people look at ringers and they're like, oh, that's cool. Or they're like, I don't get it. Right. So it's very easy for people that do like it to be like, oh yeah, cool. That's great. Let's go build something out. Look at how many communities are based around art that are just like, cool, let's just build more art. This is fun. Those will evolve over time. All right. Those will evolve into more complex missions. They'll evolve into greater organizations that'll have more influence and more capital. And many of them will become self-sustaining, either through, their own design or as a result of value they produce in the world. And yeah, they're going to displace how we work, but they're also going to displace just the overall political landscape, I think, because you'll have citizens empowered in a very different way that isn't. It's basically emulating like an industrial lobbyist or a commercial lobbyist, because you've got 5,000 people in this DAO that's worth $1 billion, and they're like, hey, we want to influence the carbon market because it's bullshit. So we're going to go in and we're going to lobby as a DAO of 5,000 people with all this capital. But, people will listen to organizations like that. It's almost like a new layer of governance for society, but it's bottoms up based on value alignment, which is this is exactly what we need. This is why I was saying earlier about this being a shift in civilization, is because it's bottoms up. We're not having to reorganize top down, or like voting for the next prime minister is like a useless concept now. It doesn't do anything. But if you can organize a bunch of people around shared values and produce sustainable value from the bottom up, then it's only a matter of time until you have influence over that sort of thing. So I think that's where it's really going to go.
Yeah, the bottom.
Oh, go ahead, man.
Yeah, the bottom up approach and how organizations evolve and emerge. I mean, you've seen it over the past week or so with like Loot and people getting like really excited about this bottoms up approach to game design, right? And DAOs are they've been starting to do that and trying to do that much longer. It's a little bit more abstract, I think, for folks, and they don't quite see the kind of metagame that each DAO is playing. But I think you described it pretty perfectly. But I got to ask, because like myself, Rizzle, we created the Whip Meetup, which is like a proto DAO, social DAO, and like we have a crew of 13 folks working towards the DAO. At this point, like thousands of actual members, like token holders and things like that. But I'm always just struck with the lack of tooling, or how primitive the tools are right now for DAOs. It's almost frustrating. I know there's better tools being developed to help facilitate this interaction and just like the day-to-day. From your perspective, like what tools do you wish you had at your disposal to help with the operation of something like a SquiggleDAO? Like what do more DAOs need more of when it comes to tooling?
I think, okay, there's two things probably. One is like enabling people to reward each other for their contributions. There's definitely tooling that gets built in that space, but it's still very immature. So I would like to see that evolve. so that because right now a lot of DAOs, including ours, is kind of like hybrid between a traditional organization and a DAO. It's not fully decentralized, and I think that's just the way it needs to be for a while. We don't have an established working culture for working in a DAO. Like, as individuals, we're not used to it. So there's a learning process there. And you need to have some people leading the charge at the end of the day if you want to move quickly. In small teams, it's easy. If you have a team of 4 devs or something like that, you can just crush. But if there's a lot more people with different skill sets and different availabilities, then it becomes a lot more challenging. And part of that is like how we reward people. So the way that SquiggleDAO works right now is, we're basically looking at, we give people rewards for units of work, like bounties. We also reward people for participation in meetings and other activities with a tip bot that we use. And then there are also community level roles that have an actual salary paid in Squig token as well for a certain job description. So it's just basic stuff, but it's ways of sort of activating people in certain areas that they're interested in and rewarding them for their participation. And I think that'll get more complex with people coming in with greater levels of responsibility, similarly receiving monthly stipends for their roles, and on top of that, ideally there's some sort of coordinate or something like coordinate that allows people to reward each other from a pool rather than somebody predefining a fixed compensation for a fixed amount of responsibility. But we don't know how effective that's going to be. I just feel like ethically we're trying to decentralize, and in the interim it's not going to be as decentralized as we would like to play with in this new culture, but we need to start somewhere, and this is just the way it needs to be. So as that tooling matures, I think we can start to experiment more with that and integrate it into the culture that we're creating. The other piece is around governance, and I think that needs to evolve quite a bit as well. So we're actually in touch with several organizations that are developing tools around these two issues or opportunities of governance and compensation, because it's obviously a known problem or opportunity, and people are building it out. But again, we're all figuring it out as we go. So having the ability to provide feedback and support into that process is really great. So for governance, we're pretty standard. We're using Snapshot to resolve voting on proposals, and then we're using Gnosis Safe and multi-sig. It's for us, it's a 3 of 5. But those two things aren't connected. So theoretically, if the Snapshot vote passed and for some reason the 5 multi-sig holders didn't agree with it, there could be a blockade. There could be an impasse. And that's not optimal, because you're still relying on the trust of those 5 people to resolve on chain any of the actual execution. So that is a very complex problem to solve, because it can resolve in many different ways. And I think it's going to take longer for us to get through that, which is why we launched with 5 people in the DAO that I guess I was probably the one with the least amount of reputation, because I just was never in the spotlight up until this point. But with people who are known in the community, who are members of other DAOs and have social capital and reputation there, it seemed like the best way to go. It's like, okay, well, enough people know who these people are, so let's start with that and do a 3 of 5 and operate this way. But ideally, that's not even an issue, and it's really just like snapshot execution. So I think eventually we'll see that. It's just going to take a while.
Yeah, I'd be really interested to hear your perspective, man, as someone who obviously has extensive knowledge in the DAO world. I've always, up until not even too long ago, man, just sort of like not like hated on DAOs, but been annoyed with it with them in general, because I feel like it's such a great concept that has been really just not very well executed by anybody up until very recently. And it seems like now, everything's starting to just mature. And I agree with a lot of what you said, man. I think you're exactly right that this is just a whole new thing, that it's a learning curve that we all have to get used to. But the fundamentals and the concept is the right direction overall. What are some other DAOs that you see that are also like, I guess you would say like progressive within the space, or like, more mature, or, just doing things that you admire as someone who has clearly given this a lot of thought?
I'd say there's two DAOs that, I really admire. One is Friends with Benefits, because it's just so massive and complex, and there's just so many talented people in there doing so many different things all at once, and it just kind of works. And the leadership team is great. They're super organized. I really appreciate about them, because they're demonstrating that it's possible, and they're showing us how to do it, which is really cool. So we definitely spent a lot of time over there. I'm a member of the DAO. We actually ran a meetup in Vancouver last week for Friends with Benefits, which was pretty awesome. So yeah, that's definitely one of them. And the other one that I've talked about before is Shark DAO. Shark DAO is something that I really admire about them as well, is that the ability for them to go from 0 to 100 was just phenomenal. Like they went through a very similar process that we did, which was very confidence inspiring for me to see that the ability for them to go from an idea to a highly functional team using a similar process that we used was very inspirational for me. But yeah, just the rate at which they're producing value and launching new products and building the community is just really it's phenomenal to see. And they're more definitely on the community end of that spectrum, where I think Friends with Benefits is a little bit more complex. It's a much bigger DAO with a much more broader social mission, and that's the beauty of what we're seeing right now, is that there isn't one playbook for success in these kind of organizations. They can be completely different configurations and still thrive. And that's a very good sign, because it means that the structure is extensible and malleable, and it can be configured, like a game for a particular outcome, whether it's a very simple singular mission or whether it's something maybe more broad and social and fluid, they can still function. So those are, for me, two on like different ends of the spectrum that I think are just really exciting to watch and participate in. And yeah, like any good DAO member is like spending time in other DAOs just to see how they function, because they're all completely different. And yeah, it's interesting to watch.
Real quick, because Shark DAO is something that I'm not super familiar with. Friends with Benefits, I think every one of our listeners will have heard of and be more familiar with, but could you kind of give us the real quick TLDR for Shark DAO?
Yeah, so they launched with the specific goal of acquiring nouns from Nouns DAO, basically. So very interesting project. It's an infinite, fountain of generative art. It launches every day. And the Shark DAO is like, well, let's try to acquire some of these and build a community around it. And I think they've got 3, maybe 4 now, 2 in the top 10. And it was all self-funded, it was all self-organized, very simple mission, leverages some excellent tooling that just came out, like Juicebox, which I think is super cool. I think Juicebox is super awesome as a tool, because it just enables so much possibility on its own. It's like one of those incremental pieces that's built on all this other DeFi NFT tech that's emerged, and it just unlocks this new fundraising launch mechanism for DAOs that is just fantastic. You know, there's so many other things that can come out of that product. And this is just a perfect example of how within a matter of weeks, you can have a DAO with hundreds of people in it that's got 500 ETH and, you know, 3 or 4 super rare pieces of NFT art and momentum to go and build more things. Like, that's just a phenomenal situation, you know?
Yeah, dude, I feel like I gotta dive further down the Noun DAO, Shark DAO rabbit hole as well, but I'm a little bit familiar with what's going on there. Dude, as we get towards the end, man, we're always interested in what NFTs people are collecting, you know, just sort of on the side for fun. Clearly Squiggles and the desire to acquire more Squiggles is high on the priority list. But are there any other like cool projects or NFTs that you've been just sort of tinkering around with or collecting on the side?
I wish I had time. I wouldn't call myself an NFT trader by any means. I think it's more like I want to be involved in the space and have a portfolio of tier 1 art that's going to be, you know, culturally relevant in the long term. So I wouldn't say I'm a speculator. I'm definitely switching more into build mode with SquiggleDAO. There's just not enough time. But I really like generative art. I really like, obviously, Squiggles. I like ringers. I would, you know, all the other sort of tier 1 AB stuff is sort of out of my risk profile now for acquiring. So I'm basically just holding what I have. And I think the metaverse is going to be a huge thing as well. So I have some me bits, and there's a few other like speculative plays that are, you know, long shots that I have as well, like polymorphs. And I did buy a Zed Run horse. I have a Zed Run horse as well. I think that's going to be a very cool game. So yeah, it's, for me, it's more like I'm more of an art collector. I've been buying original art informally for a few years now. Nothing crazy, you know, like local artists up here, or if I go to a show. I actually went to New York a few years ago, the last ETH conference. I think it was Consensus, actually. And there was a party where they auctioned off a CryptoPunk for like $800 or something. It was like, in retrospect, crazy.
Jesus.
But there was a guy at the party who was an old cartoon artist for newspapers, and he was doing all this crypto art in the lounge and ended up buying one of his pieces, and it's on my wall. And I just, you know, it's, for me, it's a snapshot of culture that I was participating in. And I think that's really what art should be, is like, you know, there's an emotional connection to the piece. And some of the generative art pieces that I have are a result of that. You know, they lock a sort of emotional component in for me, joining the whole movement and being involved. And I think that's probably where it will stay for me. It's less a speculative play and more just like, you know, okay, I'm locked into this culture. I'm locked into participating into this. And yeah, I mean, I'm looking at a piece right now as I'm talking, and I love looking at it. I'm just so stoked that it's mine, you know?
I love that sort of emotional snapshot of a point in time with generative art. I feel like music does that for a lot of people. You kind of listen to an old song and it's like a time travel machine. It takes you back to when you first heard it, your friends that you're listening to it with, like this. Yeah, all that. It's really, really powerful in that regard. I do the same thing, like looking at a Janisu Still Life number 5 and just remembering like going into Crypto Voxels a couple years back, charity kind of auction, having this piece that Conlon, founder of Async Art, had snatched out beneath me on Super Red during the original auction, and then winning it back in this charity auction. It's just like fucking nothing better.
That's cool.
But before you do wrap up, I want to make sure we let folks know where they can follow you at, where they can follow and get involved with the SquiggleDAO if they aren't already, maybe any important dates on the calendar. Hit the folks with all the social handles and key dates they need to bear in mind and remember.
Sure. I think the best thing to do is, if you're not already in the DAO, just go to SquiggleDAO.com. That's where all of the relevant information is available. You can find Discord there. You can find our Medium account where you can see all the major updates that we've launched. You can also find Gitbook, which is our community guide. And I should say, if you want to join the DAO currently, there's two ways of doing it. One is to own a Squiggle. We originally launched with that concept rather than ownership of the voting token because we just felt like it was better, because then it means that every member is a holder of the art too. But obviously now that they're so expensive, that might need to change as we grow. So what we're doing in the short term, rather than changing that aspect of the community, we're launching this program called the Scholarship Program, where we will intake anyone basically on a regular interval if they're interested. And then we'll also have the ability for people to propose work for the DAO from external teams. For example, this afternoon, I have some meetings with a couple developers and some marketing people who are interested in building stuff for the DAO who aren't in the DAO. And so we'll work with them to effectively join the DAO as a result of the work that they want to contribute. And we're launching that scholarship program probably in the next week, as an opportunity for people that want to join that aren't already in. So they'll have all the same rights essentially, or access as a Squiggle holder will, and they'll also be in a position to, join a team, take on bounties, whatever it is. So it's basically like they do own a Squiggle, but they don't. And hopefully, maybe someday they can actually use the rewards to buy their own Squiggle as well.
I love that. Super cool. Well, Greg, I just definitely want to thank you for taking the time to speak with us today, record this podcast. We love the Squiggles. I know everyone does. So just thank you once again for that. And yeah, Godspeed on collecting as many Squiggles as you can for the Squiggle DAO.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot harder now, but we're still going to do it. We can still do it.
Oh yeah. Cool, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.